All right, so there are just general housekeeping rules that I want to tell. We will mute everybody just now, and then whosoever has a query or a question, they can raise their hand. They can also keep their video open and raise their hand like physically as we do in the court, or they can raise hand. There is a feature for it in Zoom, and you can use that. Second, question and answers. If at all you have any, we will be taking it at the end of the session. And if you have any specific input which is pertaining to the specific question of law that Roshan will be addressing, then you can always raise your hand and we can have an interjection there. So I think that's about it, and over to you, Roshan. Let's get started.
Yeah, thanks, Pallavi. So I would not like to take more than 20 minutes because I would probably like to, keep around 30-40 minutes for discussion since, there are some very learned lawyers who are there today who joined us. And I'm sure, we will gain from their conversation more than, the repetition of whatever we have read in a structured manner by me. So since we are starting at 6:10, I would like to exactly end this not more than 7:10 at 7:10 because let's keep it at 1 hour strictly, and we've in the past also kept this fairly punctual. So keeping that in mind. So all right. So basically, we all understand that. I mean, we've all read about this in the news. The entire Ranbaxy, the entire problem which took place, and so many newspapers, so many news agencies covered this entire scam, if we may call it like that. And then eventually, it ended up being at the Delhi High Court where the bail was granted in one of the, I believe, ED offenses. So I would just like to, basically, rather than going in detailed facts very meticulously, the idea would be to broadly understand what the transaction was like where exactly did the criminality set in, and how exactly has Delhi High Court appreciated the kind of content of the FIR and the contentions which were placed before the Delhi High Court by both sides, which is the prosecution and the defense. The defense obviously being the applicant because it was the defense which had moved the bail application for regular bail in the ED offense. So the transaction, to begin, it's very important for all of us to understand what the transaction was like. The transaction was like this, that the two brothers had a private limited company. That private limited company was called RHC Holding Private Limited. They had 50% each as shareholding in this private limited company. Now, this private limited company floated a listed company, a publicly listed company. And this publicly listed company was called REL, I believe, Religare something for E Limited. So this public listed company had further got a subsidiary called Religare Finvest Limited, which is the NBFC. So essentially 3 levels of companies: RHC Holding Private Limited, which is the main holding company, having 50% for both the, in which both the brothers had 50% shareholding. Then RHC Holding Private Limited company had a subsidiary company called REL. REL being the publicly listed company on the stock exchange, and then REL having further a subsidiary called Religare Finvest Limited. Now, this is a case of essentially circular trading, or basically related party transactions where loans have been given out in a way in which they should not have been as per law. So what happened was RFL, which is the NBFC company, RFL started giving out loans to, let's assume XYZ. So let's just start from RFL, and let's say RFL is this NBFC there in the market, and that NBFC starts giving out loans, let's say to the tune of 50 crores to XYZ, ABC, MMD, like this 19 companies. Now the loans which have been given to these random companies, eventually what they do is that they further give this amounts to another company called RHC group of companies, and that RHC group of companies gives it to RFL to settle the loan of RFL. So I'll just try and read out some relevant portions so that I can explain this in a more clear manner. And you know, Ankur and Pooja can come in whenever they want, because I believe Pooja has also worked very closely on this case, and Ankur, I believe, would have read this before joining this. Yeah, so essentially, RFL gave loans to XYZ, and XYZ hence became one of the borrowers of the NBFC. But what XYZ did was that it further just transferred the money to RHC. Now, I want to tell you what is the link between the transfer. That link is very important. Why did XYZ transfer the money to RHC? That is a very important question. And the answer to that is, these funds were just randomly allocated to other controlled companies. So essentially, this was not a lender-borrower relationship. This relationship was only a relationship of just, randomly transferring the money. So when XYZ was transferring the money to RHC group of companies, it was essentially more like by way of a favor, more than anything else. And then RHC group of companies used this money to eventually transfer it to RFL, thereby setting off the loans which RHC originally had taken from RFL. So what happened in the process was that XYZ became NPAs. They never paid back to RFL. RHC paid back to RFL because RHC had loans taken from RFL. Okay, now I will, in very clear terms, I will again try and explain the entire transaction. RFL is this NBFC. RFL gives the money to XYZ on loan. XYZ takes that loan and has no intention to pay back to RFL. So just for a moment, please concentrate and understand that when XYZ takes this money from RFL, it does not have any intentions to pay back RFL. What XYZ goes ahead and does is, XYZ, because it is controlled by the accused, and the accused being Shivinder Mohan Singh and MMS and all these guys, it just randomly allocates this money to RHC. मतलब कोई reason नहीं है, कोई quid pro quo नहीं है, कोई consideration नहीं है. There is absolutely no logic for this allocation. XYZ RHC को क्यों पैसा दे रहा है, इसका कोई logical answer ही नहीं है. But फिर भी XYZ ने RHC को पैसा दिया. And then RHC very smartly or very conveniently, if I may say, used this money and set off its previous loans which it had to pay to RFL. So basically, RFL's own money, which is essentially public money, because RFL was an NBFC and RFL's parent company was REL, which is a listed company. So all the money of the NBFC eventually came from the public. And therefore, RFL's public money was squandered and was siphoned off in a way to benefit RHC. Now we all know what RHC is. RHC is the company which is, a private limited company, and it's a holding company which was, controlled and held by the two brothers. So essentially, if I have to put this in a nutshell, public money was taken by way of rights, by way of a share subscription by REL through the Sensex listing. After REL took this public money, it gave some parts of it to RFL, which is an NBFC. The RFL gave loans to a lot of entities which were controlled by the entire group, the criminal group of promoters, including two brothers and some of their associates. And then this money, which was given to these borrowers just gave it to RHC for free of cost, like a way of gift, just ex gratia, just without any quid pro quo. And then RHC very conveniently, obviously, used this money to pay back to RFL. The loan, what happened? The loans of RHC got settled. RHC का जो उधार था, जो RFL को उसको देना था, those got evergreened in the terms of the FIR, and hence Shivinder and the MMS, the two brothers, became debt free. Whereas XYZ, जो original borrower है RFL का, वो NPA हो गया, because obviously they won't have the funds, because RHC is not going to pay back anything. XYZ more or less give it by way of a gift to RHC. So it's this kind of a circular transaction which got the eyes of the ED and the cops, and therefore they lodged the appropriate FIRs. It's a little kind of a circular transaction, but not very complicated in my mind, and therefore that was that. Now, what happened before the High Court? The High Court, heard both sides. There are some important points that I would like to discuss for 5 minutes, and after that, I will open the floor for discussion, or probably I'll take 10 minutes and then, open the floor for discussion. It's very important for all of us to understand that the main arguments on behalf of the applicant are from page 5 to page 14. And I would just like to highlight the important ones, if not all, as to what exactly was contended by the applicant, saying that these are the grounds on the basis of which they should get the bail. The accused in this case should get the bail. I think the first important point is this very, very crucial point is point number E on page 5 of 45, that the affairs of RFL were managed. Pallavi, if you can come to point E on page 5 of the judgment. Yeah, that the affairs of RFL were managed and supervised by a risk management committee and a related party transaction committee, which committees operated under the corporate loan book, loan approval committees. Decisions for loan approvals were made by these committees, but the applicant was not a member of any of these committees. Now, basically, Shivinder Singh is arguing that, listen, there was a way in which the loans were given by the NBFC to XYZ or to ABC, to those 19 companies which have been alleged to be used as to have been used as intermediaries to siphon off the money. So Shivinder Singh is saying that when there was a proper committee for that, how can you pin the allegation on me? And these loan approval committees have people from the company, and obviously senior members from the company, and therefore when they have taken a kind of a decision, then the allegation can't be pinned on me. But importantly and interestingly, I would just like to quickly add here, the interesting thing to note is that obviously all the people on this committee will be under the influence and direct control of the two brothers. There is no doubt about that, because this is not a company where we are looking at independent directors or neutral directors forming the majority of these committees. These committees would be majorly constituted by touts. I'm saying touts, by let's say representatives, biased representatives of the two brothers. Therefore, to be honest, I didn't think that this kind of a point had too much of merit in it. Then another very important point which came into play was that which is the point number I on page 6. Point number I on page 6. Now, Shivinder Singh, the applicant argues that, listen, the investigation has been completed, the complaint has been filed before the designated court under the PMLA Act, and therefore there is no reason for a judicial for the judicial custody. It's just not warranted, because once obviously the investigation has been filed, the complaint has been filed, there is no scope or reason for any further investigation. But interestingly, the ED has very well countered this, saying that with regard to a large chunk of amount, I believe 450 crores, the investigation is complete. But with regard to the balance 1600 crores, the investigation is not complete, which means that this is not a case where it can be said that the investigation is complete. The investigation is only partially completed. So hence, bail should not be granted as per the ED. And obviously, this is something which all the criminal practitioners here on this group will appreciate. It is, we all understand how 167 of the CRPC works, how default bail works, and we all understand how the investigating officers file a particular charge sheet at a particular time to ensure that the accused does not get the default bail. But it is always a continuing investigation, because sometimes it is actually, and this might be a very prosecution minded thought by me, but I think it's a legitimate thought that sometimes the nature of the gravity of the offense is so what do I say? It's so heinous. It's so overarching. It's so broad that it's absolutely impossible to complete investigations within 60 or 90 days. Which is why IOs or investigating authorities are not wrong in asking for more time and in opposing the bail. So this is another important point that I wanted to flag. Now, there is one essential point, that is M. I mean, I'm sure everyone knows it, but I'll still repeat it. If Pallavi, you can see M on page 7 of the judgment. It says that further incarceration of the applicant would militate against the fundamental postulate of presumption of innocence and would be in violation of the fundamental principle that bail is the rule and jail an exception. This is obviously something which we all know and which we all very well understand, that it's more in theory, less in practice. Because, you know, if you will go and argue this before a sessions court in Patiala House or a magistrate court in Tisazari, then, you know, in all likelihood, they will just, you know, ignore this, like, I mean, absolutely clearly. So this kind of an argument usually does not, you know, get a lot of consideration from the bench. So basically, the next point, which is also important, is, and this is extremely important, I think this is a very beautiful point, which I also have developed in a couple of my my EOW matters, and this is on page 7.0, that REL and RFL have from time to time prepared and filed their accounts, which have been subjected to internal and external audits and required public disclosures before statutory regulators, which negates the ED's allegation that the applicant has conspired to conceal any facts. Now, you see, the beauty of this point is that if this point can be explicated, then one can clearly see that this is a case of delay in lodging the FIR, because REL and RFL अगर गड़बड़ कर रहे थे और इतने सालों से गड़बड़ कर रहे थे, तो पुलिस तब कहाँ थी, ED तब कहाँ थी, where were the investigating authorities then, where were the, you know, prosecuting authorities then? And there is clearly a delay because all these companies have to work in a fairly transparent manner, in the sense that they have to, you know, continuously provide these documents and provide these, you know, kind of reports or, you know, financial statements to the relevant authorities. Now, one very interesting point is point P on page 7. And I'll just read it out, that although the ED has alleged that regulators like the RBI had expressed concern regarding the loans extended by RFL, white letters, this, it requires to be noticed that the RBI never took any action under Chapter 3B of the RBI Act, which provision empowers the RBI inter alia to remove directors, to supersede the BOD, and even to wind up an NBFC, none of which the RBI did. Very important point. Again, I mean, time and again, you've seen this, that, you know, if there is a power and that power has not been exercised, then that does mean not a complete waiver, but some amount of waiver of that deviation. And the applicant has very well said that, you know, the RBI might have written letters saying that, you know, irregularities are going on, that, you know, interested party loans are being given, loans are not being properly backed by appropriate collaterals or whatever. But what did the RBI do? The RBI did not do anything other than writing these letters, which essentially meant that, you know, RBI probably did know from the beginning that, you know, all of these might be minor deviations and not something substantial. So these are some of the important points. And after this, I would like to come to the point which has been raised by the applicant, Mr. Chidambaram, where eventually the bail was given. He also said that he is not at flight risk, and, you know, he has deep roots in the society. And he said that, you know, he's already been behind the bars for 9 months, which is a very long time. And yeah, he cited 2 very useful judgments, and these 2 useful judgments are on page 12. He cited Anil Saxena versus State of NCT of Delhi. That is page 12, paragraph D, if everyone has that. And this very interestingly, you know, says that Anil Saxena was another accused under the FIR. And while granting bail to Anil Saxena, the court has held that the Risk Management Committee and the RPT Committee were aware of the proposal documents on the basis of which loans were approved, and that it is not an uncommon practice for lenders to extend loans on the strength of comfort provided by creditworthy and known persons. Which means, to some extent, the argument of the applicant did get vindicated by this earlier order of the High Court, where Anil Saxena, in a similarly placed circumstance, was given bail on the ground that, you know, that committee had already passed these loans, which meant that, you know, a specific liability cannot be pinned on a particular individual in the company. Also, what is important is this judgment. Obviously, Nikesh Tara Chand Shah was discussed, saying that, you know, the twin conditions of PMLA are no longer valid and all of that. So this was in substance the arguments of the applicant. The respondents obviously rebutted these arguments, which is the prosecution agencies. The prosecution agency said that these guys were the applicant was always in control of the company, and the fact that know, the fact that a lot of investigation is still pending. Therefore, bail should not be granted because as of now, only 450 crores worth of amount, was investigated. But 1600 crores is still underway, which means that, there's a lot of investigation pending and, it shouldn't be, the bail shouldn't be granted at this stage. One very important judgment, and this is something which I've taken personally note of and I've downloaded this judgment also, is the state of Bihar versus Amit Kumar, which is on page 19 of the judgment. And this judgment very interestingly argues or lays down that where charge sheet had been filed but the investigating agency intended to file an additional charge sheet, presence of the accused in custody may be necessary. Which this is another very, very important judgment which the prosecutors use very often, saying that just because a particular charge sheet has been filed, that doesn't mean much. And because there is an additional charge sheet which is on its way, therefore bail should be rejected. Now, in rejoinder, there were a couple of very interesting points which came to the fore in the rejoinder of the applicant. Someone wants to come in? All right. So basically, this Pallavi, if you can have para D on page 22.
Para D on 22.
Yeah, para D on 22. To allay the apprehension expressed by the ED as to influencing witnesses or tampering with evidence, senior counsel contends that for one, unlike the statement recording under 161 of CRPC, which is not admissible in evidence, the witness statements recorded under section 50 of the PMLA are admissible, and therefore witnesses will not be able to renege on what they've said in such statements. And this is an argument which is a very useful argument from the side of the applicant, saying that because the statements during the investigation itself are statements which cannot be reneged. It's more like a statement before a judicial authority. Therefore, there is no threat of the witnesses reneging on their statements, and hence bail should be granted because tampering of the witnesses is just out of question. Then tampering of the witnesses ko ho hi nahi sakta. So because those statements have already been recorded and they already carry evidentiary value. So to that extent, the applicant raised this point. He also raised that, all the hard disks, computer systems, CDs, everything has been taken away. And, therefore, because it's all documentary evidence which is required in this kind of a case, bail should be granted. Then after this, from page 25 to page 35, there are some judgments which I would not like to repeat. Everyone can read that for their own self. These judgments are basically, leaning towards the side of why bail should be granted and why personal liberty is an important aspect of our overall criminal jurisprudence, and personal liberty should be respected quite seriously. Finally, just to sum up the judgment in a couple of minutes, the ratio of the judgment is from page 36 to page 43 or 44, and some of the important points are essentially a repetition of what was raised by the applicant, that the statements are under section 50, that because the statements are under section 50, therefore tampering of witnesses out of question. The equipment, hardware, physical, electronic, everything has already been seized. Therefore, there is no further investigation which is required in this case. The complaint has already been filed, which means that the investigation has, to a great extent, culminated. The one very important point, which is point G on page 37, is, and this is the Honorable Judge speaking in his own words, the ED has not indicated any foreseeable timeline for completing investigation in respect of the alleged remaining about INR 1600 crores, and therefore to link the applicant's judicial custody to completion of that ongoing investigation, if at all, would leave the key to the applicant's custody with the ED, which is not acceptable to the scope. I think this particular point gives out a very, very strong message. It gives out a message to all those deviant investigating officers who try and show the court that the investigation is going on, it'll take time and this and that. this kind of paragraph in the court in the judgment clearly sends out a strong message that, listen, this is not an endless affair. This is not an affair where you guys can keep going on and on and on, and you can take your own sweet time without there being any certainty while the accused is languishing behind the jail. The fact of the matter is that the trial is not over, the conviction has not happened, and therefore the liberty of the accused will not be taken so casually. In addition to this, I believe there was some other points which were repeated by the Honorable Judge, which had originally been pleaded by the applicant. And in the end, the judge prescribed a lot of conditions on the basis of which bail was given. So you see the larger point being that, I personally feel that this bail order is fairly balanced. Obviously, the question is now that till the time the charge sheet has been filed, in this case it got filed, but the fact is that the investigation is still pending, and a major part of the investigation is still pending. Hence, till the time everything gets over and things come before the court, it is extremely difficult to judge the criminality and the collusion of the accused persons, because these white collar crimes are fairly complex. Now, just to explain what I'm trying to say, you see, the FIR does prove that there was circular trading of money or circular trading of funds. The FIR does prove that the funds which were taken by the NBFC were not probably used for the purposes they were taken, or that 3 or 4 entities were working in conjunction with each other, which was being controlled by one particular group of people. All this is proven absolutely correct. But what I don't see out of the FIR is the siphoning. You see, the point is that it's so difficult to prove siphoning without a complete charge sheet and a proper trial, which entails examination and cross-examination. That will be so, in my opinion at least, is very difficult on a prima facie basis to be able to ascertain whether there is actual criminality or not. Because you see, circular trading is one thing, siphoning off is another. There can very well be cases in which there can be circular trading which does not lead to siphoning of the funds. And in that case, in my mind, that will be a civil dispute. That will be a breach of contract. That will be a breach of loan agreement, because you didn't use the loan for the purposes of which you took the loan. But that would not mean any criminality, because I have not unjustly enriched myself, or I have not criminally breached the trust of the public whose funds are involved. So on that point, I think I would like to probably sum up and open this for discussion, and see what everyone has to say.
So Ujjwal had a question. I think Ujjwal wants to. Ujjwal, do you want to tell us about your question, please?
Yeah. Hello. Hi. Can you hear me, guys?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the question of delay is not important in this case because it's a continuing cause of action. So when there is a continuing cause of action, we cannot say just because there was no there was a statutory obligation of RBI to look into this aspect. So hence ED cannot.
No, Ujjwal, continuing cause of action is alien to criminal law. Continuous cause of action is a concept strictly in the civil law. If I'm saying something wrong, someone else can correct me. But continuing cause of action is a concept strictly in the civil law domain.
What I am trying to suggest is, in this particular case, it's not as if that the amount which has been siphoned is for a particular period point of time. It is for a legitimate. It is a continuing in the sense because it has for a specific period of point of time. So that's why I'm saying it's a continuing cause of action.
Yeah. All right. Fair enough. Ankur, you are unmuted.
Oh, no, I was also confirming that to my understanding also, there is no concept in criminal law of continuing cause of action. And the only test is how close or proximate the offense is to the FIR.
Yeah, correct. Exactly. So Ankur, since you do a lot of NCLT disputes as well, would you like to probably throw some light on the nature of the transaction between the companies inter se? How exactly these companies operated, and probably some other sort.
So, I mean, I suppose the nature of transaction is fairly similar in a lot of these ED and SFIO or EOW cases. And this is broadly the structure that is adopted, that from company A, funds are transferred to company B. And then slowly they are routed back either to the shareholders, major shareholders, or the management or entities controlled by them. And in this case, I suppose it becomes a little bit more egregious because one of the entities, RFL, is an NBFC. I'm not sure if it's a deposit taking or non-deposit taking NBFC. If it's a deposit taking NBFC, then it's even higher an offense because they would have received deposits from the public. And those are the funds that are being routed back. Also, to just sort of try to cover one of the issues that you discussed was how the public trust is being breached. Again, that would likely be through RFL, because when RFL receives the money from the public, it is with an understanding that they will be used for legitimate loan transactions. Whereas if they are dispersed to entities controlled by the management, without looking into a genuine business purpose or without having adequate collateral or security for these loans, then that would constitute the breach of trust in 406.
Yeah, so that's very interesting, Ankur. I would like to just quickly come in there and ask you a specific question. Let's assume that what you've said is correct, and obviously it's correct because RFL at the end of the day took money from the public through REL, but did not use it for the purposes for which it took it, and used it for some other purposes because it was being controlled by accused persons. But the larger point is that if we assume that there was no siphoning, if we assume that there was only circular routing of the money and circular flow of the money, but at the end of the day the siphoning was not there, then also would you say 406 will attract?
To my understanding, it will be attracted, and siphoning is again an undefined term. So one of the modes of siphoning can also be that I remove the funds to an entity which doesn't have a genuine business purpose and without taking adequate collateral. So even through that channel, funds can be removed from a particular company from, say, in this case, from a regulated company, which is RFL, to unregulated entities, and then those unregulated entities then can do whatever they want with those funds. No check is exercised. I think recently there are a lot of cases even where bank officials have been indicted for this sort of activity. I think Punjab National Bank is one of the...
Yes, Punjab. So you're absolutely right. Okay, just stepping a little aside from this particular judgment, and just giving, I mean, I have this thing in my mind. I have this kind of a question in my mind which I would like to throw throw to everyone. If we step aside from this judgment and assume for a moment that the loans were given and the loans were then again rotated through a web of companies, but those loans or that kind of money came back to the original company safe and sound. In this case, obviously the money got siphoned away or money got diverted away. It never came back to the company in its original form, because the holdings company was able to offset its own debt, which is where the holdings company got an advantage. But let's for a moment assume that only the circular transaction took place and siphoning didn't take place. Then in that case, Ankur, would you say that 406 will be attracted again?
406 will likely still get attracted because again the funds were removed without a legitimate business purpose and without complying with the undertakings, or whether express or implied, that were given while receiving the funds in the regulated entity. So in that sense, 406 will apply. The fact that the loan that was given was ultimately returned can be a strong mitigating factor for sentencing or for other purposes, even for compounding perhaps.
Correct.
But not necessarily for closing the offense altogether.
Yeah, so probably we can agree to disagree here, because I particularly feel that this might be at best a breach of contract, and because there is no loss as such. But yeah, you're right, 406 definition does not require a loss. It just requires a representation, and on the basis of that representation, an advantage. All right, that's most useful, Ankur. Thank you for the inputs. If there is anyone else who wants to come in, please feel free to jump in and kind of add to the discussion. anyone. Shomendu is there, Samir Bhai is there. Pooja, you worked quite extensively on this one. So if you want to, make any comment or ask any question. Yeah, Pooja, if you have any doubts or if you want to ask any question, you are muted. You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah. So it was with respect to public money, because in the judgment on page number 11, the applicant has cited one case to argue that even though banks accept deposits from the members of the public, such transaction does not necessarily involve public money. So the whole discussion regarding public deposits and public money, and hence the breach of trust. So how does that get affected in light of that particular judgment? It is G. Udayan Dravid versus State.
Yes. So basically, I think the court was fairly clear that, this judgment will not apply to the present facts of the case, because at the end of the day, just one second, can you locate to me that judgment on the
Page number 11,
page 11, no?
para 6A.
Meanwhile, if anyone else wants to take the question, they can. I will just quickly read this.
The citation is at page 9. Maybe we can try to pull out the actual judgment and look at that,
Yes.
the context of it.
Yes. You're right. So basically, Ankur is absolutely right. The facts might have been different. Also, you see, these are broad propositions of law, and I don't think this bail has been granted, Pooja, on the basis of this ground. This ground was, you're right, this ground was pleaded by the applicant. But to the best of my knowledge, when I was reading the ratio, the court did not challenge the fact that, in this case, public money was involved or not. Clearly, the public money was involved. And I'll tell you how public money was involved. Public money was involved in this case. And, I'll tell you the interesting distinction. Probably in this judgment, there is no listed company which is involved. In this judgment, which has been cited, this judgment of G. Udayan Dravid, in this judgment, probably there is no listed company involved. Whereas in our case, there is clearly a listed company, and that listed company being REL. And you see, REL, on the basis of their shares on Sensex, were able to raise money, and this money they gave to the NBFC. The NBFC being RFL, Religare. So clearly, the money that RFL was so leisurely, in such a leisurely way, distributing to people and distributing to companies was public money. And in the literal sense of the term, in fact, it was public money, and therefore, I think the judge also correctly did not lay too much emphasis on this.
So just to add on to that, I was just trying to quickly run through this Udayan Dravid judgment. In that case, it was a simpler case of loan default, and the loans were secured loans, and by the time the judgment came to be passed, the dispute had been settled between the bank and the accused parties. So that's perhaps the reason why.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it must have been a simple transaction. Yeah. So I think it will be important if all of us can read this judgment also. I mean, I would probably, Pooja, probably you can circulate this on the group later, on the RTRF group. Anyone else? Any other doubts? Any other questions? I understand this is a bail matter, and charge sheet is not before us, which is why it kind of makes our task easy of brainstorming over it. But notwithstanding that, if there is anything else which needs to be discussed, we can discuss it. So Pallavi, I think we should draw this to a close. I think this was.
I just have one question actually to Ankur, and that is primarily on the role of this loan approval committee. I mean, how do you foresee that? I understand Roshan actually said that this is basically on the behest of the promoters that they've been acting. But then what is the point of having checks and balances, especially where public money is involved,
No, I agree. The loan approval committee and the approval by the committee would have a strong implication in a case of this nature. But the more likely consequence is that the investigating agency will also indict the persons in the loan approval committee than to say that others will get discharged on this ground. So unless there was something to show that they were unable to exercise a check because proper information was not revealed to them, I think the more likely consequence is that the members of the LSE would also be held liable and would also be indicted.
Anybody else? I mean, this is an open discussion. If anybody wants to...
I think Roshan wants to say something, but his mic
Oh,
is
Roshan has
muted.
been muted. This is surprising. How is Roshan muted? Roshan, can you unmute yourself? I've not been playing around at all. Surprising. How is he muted?
Yeah, no, that's perfectly fine. So I just want to, Pallavi, quickly add to a point to what Ankur, that, you know, these committees, you see, one of the interesting arguments which comes from the accused side is that, and this came in the Chidambaram matter as well. You know, counsels for Chidambaram also argued this, that, you know, the prosecution has not made the others on the committee an accused, and therefore the prosecution is bad. Whereas this argument does not go a long way. I don't see that being accepted by the court in the usual course. But this is definitely one of the arguments which comes from the side of the applicant, saying that the committee had 10 members, all 10 of them, you know, came together to pass the loan, but the prosecution has only selected me, or the prosecution has only, you know, alleged me or implicated me, and therefore, you know, the prosecution is bad. But usually the courts are fairly clear that, you know, you can't always, you can't claim negative right of equality. Essentially, if, you know, others are not being punished, that does not mean that you have a defense by reason of that. So yeah.
But these members of the committee must be independently appointed, no? Or is it that there must be some manner in which the appointment...
Yeah, that Ankur would be in a better position.
I think these are these are internal committees. So the members would be likely appointed from the board of directors and maybe some of the senior management positions of the company. So
This was an interesting
and they will also have some of the independent directors would necessarily have to be part of the committee. That's the usual course.
Although to the best of my knowledge, none of the provisions of the Companies Act deal with such internal committees.
Not for loan approval committees, but some others are there. Risk management committees and some other committees are prescribed.
So I see nobody else is contributing today. I think this was a little exhausting judgment for them to read, is it? So maybe next week when we resume, we will have something interesting.
And also, Pallavi, to be honest, I think we've covered the entire judgment in a fairly crisp manner. So I'm sure, you know, anyone who views it it'll be of some help at least to them.
Sure.
So yeah, let's call this a close and probably reconvene next week for another judgment.
Let's do that. All right. Thank you so much, and have a nice weekend, all of you. We shall see each other soon. Bye, Roshan.
Bye everyone. Bye everyone. Bye.